But if you look at it, it's all controlled. And then why is the CIA funding third world country record labels? Why is that happening?
Leonardo DiCaprio's team has reportedly moved into full legal lockdown as controversy grows beyond Jeffrey Epstein's unsealed records, with newly surfaced footage and guest logs from Sean Combs' archives allegedly placing DiCaprio at the center of two overlapping scandals that Hollywood insiders believed were long contained. While many assumed the Epstein files pose the only threat, sources claim Combs' infamous parties, now under federal scrutiny, share the same names, dates, and suspicious pattern of silence followed by frantic damage control. DiCaprio's representatives are disputing old party photos from 2004 and 2019, calling them misleading, as Combs' inner circle leaks pre-arrest recordings and fights legal battles of its own, including lawsuits tied to streaming platforms. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice, sitting on millions of pages of Epstein-related evidence, has reportedly missed deadlines and released only a fraction of the material, as Combs' family prepares counter-projects amid separate misconduct cases. With legal filings referencing settlements, sealed depositions, and dozens of protected figures, some still influential and in the public eye, the steady flow of documents and circulating names suggests the story is far from over, and those who once relied on power and connections may soon face growing scrutiny.
What I've gathered from your articles, this seems to be a global network that Epstein was a part of, and I believe there are multiple Epsteins. Like, I don't believe that Jeffrey Epstein was the head of the snake. Yeah, like, you know, they never go after the head of the snake. They never go after
the head of the snake, quote unquote, are just, it's the billionaire class, and so there's a faction of these billionaires in our oligarchy. And of course, the American oligarchy, you know, the American oligarchs don't necessarily, a lot of them don't have an allegiance necessarily to the United States.
When the first wave of Epstein-related documents went public last December, Leonardo DiCaprio's legal team reacted swiftly, scrubbing old photos, dismissing party rumors, and quietly contacting Justice Department officials. But the urgency seemed to extend beyond Epstein alone, as they also began distancing him from Sean Combs' circle after leaked internal communications allegedly showed DiCaprio's name not only in Epstein's flight logs, but also on guest lists for Combs' most scrutinized private events, including the 2004 Miami White Party and the 2019 Los Angeles birthday celebration, both now central to a federal investigation. Unlike Epstein, Combs reportedly documented his gatherings on video, and sources claim that footage now in prosecutors' hands captures more than just casual appearances, potentially clashing with DiCaprio's carefully managed public image. At the same time, the Department of Justice has faced criticism for releasing only a small fraction of the millions of Epstein-related records despite court deadlines, fueling suspicion that some of the most sensitive material involves overlaps between Epstein's and Combs' networks and the high-profile names tied to both. With Congress threatening subpoenas and investigators examining shared connections, DiCaprio's forceful pushback against old photos appears less like simple reputation management and more like an effort to contain fallout that could shift the narrative from coincidence to deeper involvement if further evidence surfaces.
Diddy really screwed up, and I'm not referring to his criminal trial, which has him sitting in prison right now, but it has to do with something that happened right before he got arrested. If you've seen the Netflix documentary about Diddy, The Reckoning, which 50 Cent produced, there's some footage there that had never been seen before. This is a photographer that Diddy hired to follow him around and
The issue isn't just the existence of footage, but the broader pattern surrounding Sean Combs' long-running legal troubles, which predate his 2024 arrest and stem from years of allegations about his so-called private parties, where excess behavior reportedly crossed troubling lines. Former associates have described unsettling scenes, and federal raids later uncovered substances and recording equipment, with sources claiming Combs documented much of what happened. Producers and attorneys familiar with the material suggest the recordings show situations that could carry serious legal consequences, raising questions about why certain high-profile figures are now urgently distancing themselves from events tied to the same time period. At the same time, sealed filings, private settlements, and heavily redacted government releases related to the broader Epstein investigation have fueled suspicions that overlapping social and business networks may involve multiple influential individuals whose names remain protected. With ongoing court battles, documentaries aimed at shaping public perception, and federal agencies criticized for delays and limited disclosures, the situation increasingly appears less like isolated scandals and more like interconnected controversies, as those once shielded by power and reputation scramble to manage fallout, while investigators and the public wait for clearer answers.
Hard to say because there's still such a big question mark in the air because, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, is one of the executive producers on this series. Him, the director, Netflix in general, is not saying where they got this footage, only that it was obtained legally. Diddy's side is saying this is coming from a videographer I hired. I know we'll get into the cease and desist. One of the arguments they make is, this is subject to NDAs or agreements that the videographer had signed with Diddy because he was, employed by Diddy.
The looming question isn't whether more files will surface, but what happens to the powerful names tied to them? And the growing silence from those connected to Sean Combs' inner circle only deepens attention, as several high-profile figures who once attended his events have declined to comment, deleted old posts, or kept unusually quiet, while critics argue that federal authorities have released only a small portion of related Epstein materials and heavily redacted the rest, fueling suspicion that overlapping networks and sealed records may be shielding influential people from scrutiny. With court fights over footage, documentaries aimed at shaping narratives, and lawmakers pressing the Department of Justice for greater transparency, the situation increasingly feels less like isolated scandals and more like a broader system of damage control, where those with the most at stake appear focused on limiting what the public sees, suggesting that the real controversy may lie not just in what's been revealed, but in what remains deliberately out of view.
So here's what I thought he was going to say. Your Honor, and he does his whole apology and remorse and all of that, and he does it all. And then at the end, he says this. Your Honor, respectfully, I would like to say that I now understand what President Trump was saying when he said that the Justice Department was weaponized against him.
The files are still surfacing and the names are already circulating. But the bigger story isn't what is leaked. It's what has in the frantic efforts underway to keep it hidden. As legal teams scramble, lawsuits pile up, and federal delays fuel suspicion that a quiet, calculated containment strategy is unfolding behind the scenes. While the public focuses on familiar headlines, overlapping connections between Jeffrey Epstein's secretive network and Sean Combs' highly documented parties have drawn attention to how differently each operated. Epstein's world left little visible evidence, but Combs reportedly recorded everything, from guest lists to full video footage, creating a detailed trail that investigators could follow. That distinction has shifted the stakes from rumor to potential proof, especially after federal raids allegedly uncovered extensive archives of recordings and interactions, prompting concerns among attendees that the issue isn't just reputational fallout, but what those materials might actually reveal, turning what once looked like old party history into something far harder to explain or contain.
Same kind of extortion that we heard when Cassie took the stand and testified on that airplane ride back from France. Diddy said, you don't do a freak-off, I'm going to release one of the freak-off videos that you are profiled in and humiliate.
Years ago, an offhand joke about wild party behavior was brushed off as celebrity gossip. But in light of recent raids, lawsuits, and disputed footage, teams linked to those events have quietly removed old clips, gone silent, or reframed past comments. Moves that now look less like coincidence and more like coordinated damage control. Public figures who once laughed about what happened at certain gatherings are suddenly avoiding the topic, while representatives carefully shape narratives, suggesting concern that future disclosures could carry legal, not just reputational, consequences. At the same time, the Department of Justice has faced scrutiny for releasing only a small, heavily redacted portion of Epstein-related records despite deadlines and congressional pressure, prompting questions about whether the delays are about privacy or about shielding powerful connections. References in visible documents to unnamed third parties, sealed settlements, and overlapping timelines have only intensified suspicions of a broader network being protected, while parallel efforts, like hastily produced documentaries and strategic media pushes, appear a more controlling perception than clarifying facts, reinforcing the sense that what remains hidden may matter far more than what has already come to light.
If the
In
judge,
October, right.
In October 3rd, if the judge denies bail, then Trump is going to make a decision possibly immediately thereafter.
Most likely, the judge is going to, based on previous decisions, it feels like the judge is going to.
The real tension isn't about what happened years ago, but about what's happening now, as the same powerful figures who shape narratives and control information appear to influence what gets released, redacted, or quietly erased, with the Department of Justice's delays, selective disclosures, and carefully managed timelines, raising suspicions that the process is less about transparency and more about containment. Critics argue that the resistance to fully unsealing records isn't coming from victims, but from those with the most at stake, and bipartisan pressure from Congress suggests even lawmakers question whether certain connections are being protected. References to sealed names, heavy redactions, and missing or incomplete evidence across related investigations increasingly feel interconnected rather than coincidental, pointing to a broader system designed to shield influential players. In that sense, the deeper controversy may not lie in what has already surfaced, but in what remains hidden, and who still has the power to decide whether the public ever sees it.
I don't know this, but it just seems very suspicious when you go through and you look at in the history of different people that can make you go away if you know. Listen, I've worried about some of the things that I talk about on my show.
The story is far from over, and the real questions aren't just about what's already been revealed, but about who remains untouched and why, as many of the names tied to these guest lists continue operating without visible consequences, while federal decisions about what to release or withhold fuel doubts about fairness and accountability. With unresolved questions about recorded footage, sealed files, and overlapping connections, attention has shifted to who might still be working behind the scenes to manage the narrative and limit exposure. Ultimately, the issue isn't only whether more information will surface, but whether meaningful accountability will follow, or if the system will simply absorb the controversy and move on, leaving the public to piece together what's missing as the silence from those closest to the events grows.